introduction of our fantastic moderator. We're so lucky to have Kelly Wallace here with us today. Kelly's a digital correspondent for CNN, where she covers modern parenting, work-life balance, and other lifestyle issues affecting families. Based in New York, the mom of two, she's an award-winning digital journalist, and we are thrilled to have her here today to moderate our first panel about the progress of the last 10 years and how the shifts we have seen are paving the way for even more change. Please help me welcome Kelly Wallace.
Dina, thank you very much. I am so excited to be here and so excited to follow those remarks, to hear what's going on in our great city and our great state when it comes to providing more support to working families. Our panel, and I'm going to introduce this fabulous group of women in a second, we're looking back. Look how far we've come. We're going to look back at the successes and the progress over the past 10 years, and when Dina and Yolanda and Sherry asked me to do this and asked me to just say a few remarks before we started, I thought, wow, 10 years. That's a significant time frame in my life, because 10 years ago, let me see if this works. Well, let's see. Is there, yeah, you see a picture of a baby there? Yes. Do you see the socks for her hands? Yeah, I knew a lot. No. But 10 years ago, my first daughter was born, and like probably many of you in this audience, women and men, I think many of us think, wow, we're going to have our children, and we're going to just pick right back up in our hard-charging careers 24/7. Nothing's going to be different. Oh, yes. And then we hold the child in our arms, and I joke, I couldn't imagine being away from her, and I joke with Melanie about this, for an hour for a haircut, let alone 10 to 12 hours to go back to my news career. But I was one of the lucky ones, and I know I was. I had 8 weeks of paid leave through my work, and then 4 weeks, as the lieutenant governor joked, of unpaid leave that we feel all excited to have, right? And then even 2 more months I was able to take at CNN at the time of unpaid leave. And then I decided, we had some savings, and I decided, you know what? I don't think this job is going to work for my life, so I dipped into my savings, and I stayed home for a few more months before returning to work at CBS. So I know I was very fortunate. But then I became a CBS News correspondent with an 8-month-old at home, and then a few weeks later learned I was pregnant. The bosses were none too pleased about that. And then this work-life issue, the demands, the issues, the concerns, they were just very much happening to me personally. And then from that moment on, professionally, I've really done everything I can in my work and really in my personal life on this issue, which is one of my deepest passions, and that is giving all of us more flexibility and more support to working families. I put together a few slides on look how far we've come, but so much of this has been discussed already. So I'm just going to quickly put up, let me see. Yes, okay. As Yolanda mentioned, I mean, think about it, back in 2006, right? San Francisco becomes the first city in the nation to offer a paid sick leave law, right? Requiring that all workers, even part-time workers, are able to earn and use paid sick leave. And then flash forward to 2015, again, with the work of A Better Balance and other organizations, you have a number of states, including Oregon, now offering paid sick leave to all workers in the state. And then I think what's so funny, and I've covered this a little bit at CNN, there's almost like a competition in Silicon Valley, right? Who can offer the most paid leave to their workers? You had Netflix come out offering up to a year of paid leave, and then you have companies, right? I have Adobe and Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, I mean, Google. They're all kind of upping the ante to try and hold on to women and men in their organizations. But of course, we know that not everyone is benefiting from these policies. The United States, which I still think it's an unbelievable statement, it still is the only industrialized country in the world that does not mandate paid leave after the birth of a child. And only about 13% of workers get some form of paid leave from their employers. So think about how many workers are not benefiting. And what's also important, and something we're going to discuss in this panel and definitely in the panel after, this is not a women's issue. It is a women's issue and a man's issue. Just look at these findings from a Pew report from 2013. 50% of working fathers, 56% of working mothers say they find it I think it says what, somewhat or very difficult to balance their job and their families. So this is a big issue and an important one, but one way that we can figure out how to move forward is to look back on all the successes that we've had. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of these amazing women, a great panel here, to briefly introduce themselves and then just talk about what you all think was that sort of critical moment over the past decade that you think really changed the conversation when it comes to the work-family movement. And Anne, you're seated right in the middle, Anne Crittenden, and I think we want to start here. Anne wrote the book, The Price of Motherhood. It is the book that everyone talks about, that really talks about the value of care and how it has not been valued in our society and what impact that has had on women in their lives and in their careers. Anne, let's begin with you, and then we'll work our way down the panel.
Okay, you want a little autobiography? And
Yeah,
then,
why don't
and
we
then,
do everyone will do like a little brief intro, a little snapshot. Everyone in the audience has the packet, so has the detailed biography, but then really touch on that opening question, that critical moment you think over the decade that really got us where we are today.
Okay, well, as you said, I wrote this book. It was published first in 2001, and it was a very personal effort. I had been a financial reporter for Fortune, Newsweek, New York Times, and then I had a child at a very ripe age and said, oh my God, this is the most difficult job I've ever had, the most challenging, and the most important. Because of my financial background, I thought this is the most important job in the economy. So that stimulated me to write this book because I found out rather rapidly that I was the only one who thought it was the most important job. And made my story about all that. You can't imagine how many people identify with this story, but I was at a Washington cocktail party where I like to say bragging about your skills as a parent is like bragging about your skills at group sex at a Kansas City bridge game, you know. So this guy came across the room to me, really nice. He was not trying to put me down, and he said, hey, didn't you used to be Anne Crittenden? So I said, I got to write about this. Anyway, so The Price of Motherhood tried to say this is indeed the most important work going on in the economy. And number two, it is the only job in a capitalist society where the more effort you put in, the more time you put in, the worse off you are financially. It is the invisible dark matter in the universe of work, is how I thought about it. Anyway, it took off. These people took off from it, have the most impressive organization of any I met in the whole country. And I followed that book a few years later with one called If You've Raised Kids, You Can Manage Anything, which also says the work of hands-on child rearing gives you more leadership experience, managerial experience than almost anything else. It's a serious thesis. So I guess you could say my career, my feminist part of my career was to try to say everything I could say about the dignity and respect we owe to the work of traditional women's work of caregiving. And I really don't think we're going to have real gender equality until we do value caregiving work. So that's my background. As far as the last 10 years, I don't know, but I think there has been a remarkable change in the last year or two. Really, I think it's just been glacial. And in fact, very little change in some ways, very marginal. In fact, has anybody seen the new Michael Moore movie, Where to Invade Next? He's telling you again that this is the only country in the world without pay. And I'm thinking, God, I'm so sick of hearing that. Because I wrote that in the 90s, practically. That's when it was really true. Anyway, but in the last year and a half, that has changed dramatically, I think. We've got momentum. We've got momentum in 21 states now with legislation on the book, in the works. So maybe, thanks to the work of people like Better Balance, it is going to change.
Dina, do you want to pick up next? Brief remarks. We'll go down this way and come around. And that moment, what do you think? I mean, a Better Balance, its birth is really probably the most critical moment, but I wonder from your perspective in terms of that moment changing the conversation.
Well, I just wanted to share, 10 years ago is significant for me too because my daughter Talia, who's my youngest, was born in May, so we should get them together.
Yeah, definitely. While we're busy preparing, they could be playing.
Exactly, it's perfect. I actually have 3 daughters, and she's my little one, and so, this, this journey has really been, inspired by them. And, when I was pregnant with my first daughter, Emily, who's now almost 15, I was a young lawyer working in a law firm, and then I made a leap to nonprofit world. I was a visiting staff attorney at the time with Now Legal Defense and Education Fund. And it was really during this period when I read Ann Crinden's book, and I became really outraged. And I just really felt that this motherhood penalty was outrageous, and that as a women's rights lawyer, it was critical that we do something about it. And my colleagues and I, we got together and we really just, tried to really figure out how we were going to address this problem. And I think what has changed tremendously is the fact that when we launched A Better Balance, and as many of my incredible colleagues on this panel, would attest to, is just for many, many years, the chatter was about, this was your individual problem. Just figure it out on your own. And yet, it was something that was for professional women. We often could it was never easy, but we had, the financial safety net in the case of a family health crisis. Or we could potentially find another job, but for lower wage workers, as women's rights lawyers, as poverty lawyers, we just saw that the penalty, the devastation, the long-term consequences, that you could never recover from were required and demanded solution. And so it's been incredible to see the change and A Better Balance. Thank you for the shout-outs, but we have not done this alone. It is a movement, and we have incredible colleagues and partners in this field. Some of us are on this panel, next panel in the room, and so it's been a real thrill to be a part of the fight. I will say, for us, sick days, we were fighting for years, and when that law, was finally enacted in New York City, and then there was, real money put towards enforcement, pregnant worker legislation here in the city, when, we were hearing from workers who, we really couldn't provide clear legal help to because the laws were so unclear, and to be able to, get those laws to change here in the city, see them working well, and seeing other cities and states follow suit has been really thrilling.
Great. Monifa, and is it Bandalay?
Yes.
Yes, Monifa Bandalay, Senior Campaign Director for Moms Rising, an incredible organization. If you can tell us a little bit about your background and your thoughts on that critical moment over the past decade.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. Congratulations to A Better Balance. It is so wonderful to have such a strong partner and leader in this movement. Moms Rising is a membership-based organization. We have members in every state in the country, and we work on all of the same issues that A Better Balance champions, and we need them critically in order to know where to direct our members' voices and their power and where to mobilize them. And so they really play a critical role. And so when I think about what are we standing on in this moment, why are we able to make these huge gains, we really are standing on the shoulders of so many who knew that when women win, we all win, right? All of the issues that we talk about don't just impact women and mothers. When we talked about paid sick days here in New York City, those 6.4 million people, they aren't just women and mothers. There's men in there, there's children, and fair pay. When you think about a woman, a college-educated woman, losing $1 million in her lifetime because of these pay discrepancies and this wage gap, that impacts her entire family, right? It impacts the male partner or the woman partner that's in that family. It also impacts those children. So when women succeed, really everyone really does. And we take it, we really talk about this and the economic impact that it has. Breastfeeding, which was a huge issue that we need A Better Balance for, that we work on. What happens to children who are able to be breastfed educationally, their social emotional development, and the economy is incredible. And the last example I wanted to use is even in criminal justice reform. Just last week, I sat with 18 mothers who helped to champion a special prosecutor here in New York State. New York State is like the first to have an office of that type. And the push was really from mothers from all over the state who had lost family members to police brutality. And their voices were so powerful that this transparency, these reports that are coming out now that really give a lot of information and direction will impact communities and families everywhere. So it's really powerful, these voices of mothers. And when we talk about the 10-year mark and the launching of A Better Balance, I like to say that Moms Rising, we're twins. We're twinsies. Because Moms Rising is also 10 years old as of Mother's Day this year. So we have to think about what was going on that year, right? All these powerful women. But I really believe that what has happened is the strength of the political power of women. It was mentioned by the Lieutenant Governor about the 100th anniversary of the women's right to vote. Something very important happened in the 60s, which is that when most women had the right to vote in the country, there were still many, many, many millions of women of color who didn't. How do we harness the full political power of all women? And I think that the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s was a huge platform that we stand on. People like Fannie Lou Hamer, we can really say, build the building blocks so that women today can say, maybe we can't move this policy, but we can get rid of you if you don't move this policy. That type of political power is the moment that we're seeing, and that's why I don't know that the compassion has grown for our issues, you know. I think that the accountability to us has been strengthened through our political power. And I think that that's how we're going to continue to move the needle, through our civic engagement. We didn't talk about what's going on in the national debate, because that'd be a whole nother conversation, but we better get energized, right? Because not only are we counting on us as women and mothers, but just like with all these other issues, everyone is counting on us.
Oh, excellent. You know, and I want to weigh in on those strategies that really worked and the lessons learned. Let's have hello to Carol Joyner. Carol, wonderful to see you. Carol is the director of the Labor Project for Working Families. And Carol, brief introduction, and again, what you think is that critical moment over the past decade that got us here.
Excellent. Thank you, and thanks for all of your comments that came before me. They are so true, and I completely agree with you. Carol Joyner, Labor Project for Working Families. We are a 23-year-old organization that has been trying to move work and family policies, first in the state of California and now nationally. And 2.5 years ago, we merged with Family Values at Work, the network of was 21, now 24 state coalitions that focused on work and family policies. We work closely with many folks in this room, very closely with the labor movement, and really close with A Better Balance. A Better Balance has been sort of our legal sort of stewards, our guiding light on everything related to drafting bills and moving policies forward in all of the states that we're trying to pass paid sick days and paid family leave laws. I've thought about this question for a while about what was a critical moment for us in this movement, and having been around this movement first through my work at 1199 Hospital Workers Union. I am the founding director of their child care fund, and with some other people in this room, Donna Dolan and Jocelyn, started the Union Child Care Coalition, and Rhonda. And just thinking about over the last, I hate to say this because it totally dates me, 20 years, you know, how far we've come in this work, it's really amazing. What I would say is that for me, when I think about the last 10 years, I have to say that the presidency of Barack Obama really has elevated our work. I don't want to take anything away from all the work on the ground that we've done, all the campaigns, or the drafting of legislation, or the coalition building. I mean, of course, that's like the work, right?
Right.
But we've never seen a White House before that has taken this issue so seriously and has elevated it out throughout the country in the way that they have. Right off the bat, they started seriously responding to a document that several of us wrote about, you know, this is what we need to see from this White House in terms of, you know, the bully pulpit, in terms of public policy, in terms of culture change, in terms of messaging. We need to see this. And they began to take that conversation seriously. Then they immediately implemented, at the beginning of their administration, the flexibility forums. Well, they were focused on business. They weren't focused on policy so much, but they certainly created a conversation and a place where business people and policy advocates and community folks could get together and talk about what we need. They went straight through probably 3 or 4 other types of summits, including the big White House Summit on Working Families, to the Worker Voice Summit. I mean, it's just been a continuous support of these issues. And now they're doing this Lead on Leave, where almost in every state where they're moving policies, or we're moving policies on working family, paid leave, paid sick days, minimum wage, they are sending their top officials to those states to meet with people, talk about how it can happen, talk about the implementation. And so I see this administration as one, at least in my adult life, I've never seen a presidency take hold of an issue and elevate it to the extent that this administration has. So we've done the groundwork, but to have an amplifier out there to this degree has been quite unusual and really rewarding.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Carol. And not last but not least, right? Exactly. Hello, Judith Warner is here, another of our best-selling authors, and her book, many of you know it, Perfect Madness, Motherhood in the Age of Anxiety. That was getting a lot of attention. Judith, will you say a few remarks about your background and your thoughts on this issue?
I'm glad to, and it's really an honor to be here today. Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on this great anniversary. It's a really fantastic opportunity to reflect and see sort of where we've been and where we are now. I want to just start off, I suppose, by saying how strongly I agree with Carol about the role of the Obama administration in really being the kind of creating a critical moment out of what was a snowballing movement, and can come back to that in a moment. My involvement with these issues really began with the publication of Perfect Madness, which was almost exactly 11 years ago. And Perfect Madness at the time got most of its media attention and a lot of the reaction from people generally for the sort of mommy madness piece of it. This, upper middle class women turning themselves inside out, trying to be perfect mothers and generally behaving like control freaks. Probably in part because that's what makes people laugh. And it's eye-catching, let's say. But a big focus of the book and the underlying message of the book was about work-family policy. And it was about thinking deeply about what creates the vast anxiety that drives perfectionistic, controlling behavior, and making the case that this anxiety was pervasive throughout our culture and took different forms with different groups of people, but that we had this really, really deep and striking underlying problem. And my own coming to this came from the fact that I had had my children in France and then had moved here as a mother of very young children and hadn't been able to believe how different the lived experience of parenthood was over there and over here. And the reason for that was policy, was the amount of supportive policy that existed for all families in France and the utter lack of it here. And there were a couple of things that were so striking when the book came out, and even more so when you look back in time now. Part of it was that when I spoke to just kind of general audiences, the policy message, people would be angry, hostile and angry a lot of the time, or laughing at me, or saying things like, you want the government raising your children? I mean, this was just a bizarre idea, and it was fine for sort of those socialists over there, but was something that was so at odds with the American way of doing things that it was inconceivable. At the same time, though, there was a different audience for the book who really paid attention to the policy message, was really excited to hear it, and really wanted to see a movement grow around this. And that was people on the Hill, and it was also just regular readers around the country who did have this different point of view and had this hunger to see change happen, wanted to hear more about it, and wanted to know sort of what they could do, where they could go to get this off the ground. And I just remembered when Anne was speaking that not long after the book came out, we met and had dinner, and I said to her, people are asking for this, and I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what to do. A movement. I mean, I'm, such a crazy introvert. I can barely talk to people, much less, respond to these queries and do something. And she said, you don't have to, because you're a writer. do what you do. And at the same time, what was fantastic was that within a year, A Better Balance had started. Moms Rising had started. Of course, there were a number of other groups. I mean, the National Partnership. There were groups who had been working on these issues for a long time, but there really, really was a coalescing into a movement and a way of, with all the changes that we had had in technology, a way of reaching out to people online, drawing people together. It was so exciting to be able to refer people immediately to Moms Rising. I mean, still today, to be able to just, for people who don't yet know, and there aren't that many, I think, who don't know at this point, and have a place to send people. And for there to be this real movement, and also to have seen these issues go from being just kind of out there, pie in the sky stuff, to being completely central to our mainstream political conversations. And, we saw some of this. I remember seeing this start in 2006 with congressional elections. By 2008, all of the candidates were talking about this, propelled, I think at that point in large part, by then Senator Obama, who had a really, really extensive position paper on this, and who then brought this orientation to the White House, again, agreed in a way that had never been seen before, and really kept it front and center for all of the time of this administration, which has been fantastic. And I think we've seen, we've seen the political change, we've seen the laws that have been adopted and the great acceleration in this over the past couple of years. We've seen some cultural changes, I think, in the way that we talk about and think about motherhood. We've moved away from that kind of late 90s moment of, the divine calling of motherhood. We don't dare talk about anything so sort of dreary as money and what it represents. And that's hugely, hugely important. We've moved away from talking unquestioningly about the so-called opt-out phenomenon. That's really important. So I think that, rather than having like a key critical moment,
Right.
we've just been having all of these things happening simultaneously that have led us to the moment where we are now. I also think the Great Recession played a big part. It became impossible. It was always untrue that women as a group were somehow choosing the divine calling of motherhood over work. That was never true. But you could sort of get away with fudging it and, having some sort of rhetoric that made it seem true. At a point when more and more women were absolutely having to work, where families were dependent on the role of female breadwinners to an even greater extent than before. I mean, it was already happening, but it accelerated. It was that much more striking. You just couldn't have the fuzzy stuff anymore. It became impossible. So I think that's basically what I see when I look back, but I also do see remaining challenges that are still really problematic. The difficulty of moving away from talking about these issues as private problems, even with all the new laws on the books. The Center for American Progress, where I'm a senior fellow now, I didn't say that before, has done significant polling in this area, and you still see, we saw this very recently, the stranglehold that this kind of individualistic thinking has on our culture and has on this conversation in particular. So I think that we're really, really going to need a lot of creative new thinking in that direction for meeting people where they are and just moving ourselves nationally a step further.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up, my mother-in-law has this saying, she says, it didn't have to be this way, right? And so listening to all of you talk, it didn't have to be this way. We did not have to be where we are today and feel grateful about where we are. You both talked about President Obama and the Obama administration, so that is one big part of it. But I'm wondering what the strategies, right? And you guys can all weigh in, what lessons, what were you seeing that works? And you mentioned, Judith, a snowballing movement. What was happening? Is it bringing together, women online? Is it, I'm curious because maybe you want to start there.
Yeah, that was, I definitely want to talk about the voices of women being able to break through mainstream media and becoming our own media. Not just through social media, broadcasting out personal stories, the real stories, and how the policies really impact real people, but also mom to mom, you know, the blogs, all of the social media platforms really uplifted and pushed our agendas to the center, right? It can't remain on the margin if you're talking about it more than they are in mainstream media. So 10 years ago, mainstream media informed social media, right? We were responding to what we heard happening on the national media platforms. And then over the course of 10 years, it's just kind of very quickly switched, where if you can get something to trend on Twitter, then the national media has to talk about
Right,
it.
they can't look away.
They have to jump on. That becomes the news. They're out of touch. They're out of tune if they aren't talking about our issues. And women are disproportionately on all of the platforms: Facebook, Twitter, blogs. 2/3 of the big bloggers are women, and 2/3 of all bloggers. So we've kind of really taken a hold of technology, even though we're supposed to be behind in technology, but we're using it for our political power to share our stories, and we're directing the media. We're directing the narrative in a way, I think, in the past 10 years that just wasn't available when it was just one way coming at you.
That's fascinating. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Well, I want to do a shout out for someone sitting here, Valerie Young, and also Jessica DeGroot, who is, Valerie is a blogger from Washington, who also is a lawyer, who responded to this, is critical part of this new mothers movement. And you've got a great following, and Valerie is somebody who might have something to add as well.
I have a thought just about demographics also, what, you know, in terms of what has changed. Millennials, the power and the importance of millennials. They are going to be 75% of the workforce in 10 years, and they're a generation who, from the moment they came into adulthood, have stressed the importance of work-life balance. So when you think about accountability, who both employers are accountable to, and of course, lawmakers increasingly are accountable to, this has been a demographic wave that's been important. I think that there's just one risk in saying that. People have a tendency, this also came through in some polling, to believe that demographic changes, age changes are going to get us to the right place, and it's just not enough. And especially when it comes to bringing access to everyone for these policies.
Yeah.
I just want,
Go ahead.
okay.
Yeah,
thank
weigh
you.
in.
I just wanted to weigh in on, Judith, you had said that we still have a long ways to go in terms of shifting the conversation from this is an individual problem to this is a societal problem. But I do want to acknowledge how far we've come in terms of that. And years ago, we talked about these as, this is your personal problem, what's the matter with you that you can't figure out your work-life balance. And now I think people are, thanks to the internet and so many stories being on the internet about how the difficulty people are having in terms of raising families and being productive on the job, thanks to those books, the books you all have written, that people are now beginning to see, especially when you compare the U.S. with other countries, that it really is a political problem. It really is a cultural problem. And I don't think we're there 100%, but I think that there is a growing segment of the people in this country who are seeing that this is a problem that we need to address nationally. The other thing I think that has shifted tremendously is the role of labor in terms of this work. Like, I come out of the labor movement and have always believed that the labor movement has been committed to work and family issues as defined by fair wages, retirement security, health insurance. All of these are work and family issues. Most importantly, too, is over a 100-year fight to gain control over your time, right? And so labor unions were bargaining and fighting for some measure, some control of time and for the weekend many, many years ago. But over the last, I would say, 20 years, what we've been seeing is a deeper engagement in these conversations with regard to paid leave and paid sick days, more bargaining at the collective bargaining table to win these policies, more engagement with coalitions in their communities to pass paid family leave, paid sick days, scheduling bills. Very large unions like UFCW, SEIU, the AFL-CIO overall being engaged in these campaigns. And for Family Values at Work campaigns, the 24 states where we are, there's not a single campaign, there's not a single coalition that doesn't have labor at the center of that coalition. I think there was only one bill that got passed with like 1 or 2 labor unions in support. Most of them have several. And they're engaged at very different levels. But I think that that level of engagement is both helping to strengthen the labor movement, and it's also giving real power and strength, strategic support to these campaigns out in the field. And I think it's that synergy with the labor movement, community organizations, legal shops like ABB, and a number of other, different really thoughtful organizations coming together. And that synergy is helping us to sort of propel forward.
Dina, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, so much has been said that I agree with. I just, as I said before, I think one of the most effective strategy has really been working in coalition. I mean, we are lawyers, but without Moms Rising, out there with 1 million members, shouting from the rooftops and engaging people online, I mean, it has made, we're stronger, and we have so many partners in the Labor Project and Family Values at Work, groups that have, broad-based coalitions in various states, from health groups, from unions, from not just women's groups, which I know this is a discussion for the second panel. I mean, we are advancing the rights of working families. We saw this issue when we formed clearly as a women's rights issue, but we also knew this is not just a women's rights issue. As you clearly look back, you're seeing a lot of women talking about this as a women's rights issue, which is why Panel 2 is looking forward more broadly. So, I think just working with incredible partners across the country who bring different things to the table has been incredibly effective. And then, as I said before, location, that there's gridlock in Washington. We've been able to work in the states, and that's been an effective strategy. And then once we work with partners to pass these laws, enact the laws, that's not good enough, because, these are just, documents on paper, essentially. If workers don't understand their rights and feel empowered to exercise their rights, these laws, everything that we're fighting for, is virtually meaningless, in my opinion. And so enforcement is a critical strategy in our fight. I think people, once the law's passed, it's like not time to go home yet. There's real work to be done, and I think that's something that we as an organization we're deeply committed to, and we've, I would say, using the power of individual stories, really be able to lifting up the voices of our clients, of other advocates, of other workers in our partner organizations, to really say this is a problem, or this is still happening, or this law is not being properly enforced. I think about Armanda Legros, who came to a better balance because she was pushed out of her job. She had handed in a doctor's note to be temporarily relieved from heavy lifting. She wound up on food stamps, public assistance, was just, really, felt really like helpless. But she became to us, we were able to, give her legal support through our Families at Work legal clinic, but even more, Armanda became a powerful voice for change. She delivered the message. She actually delivered the message to Congress. And she was the best spokesperson there was, frankly, at this briefing, because she really spoke in a way that people understood. And I think part of the problem is people are so busy because this is such a personal issue, and people don't really look at this in, we just are trying to get by in our own lives, that, people don't often think, especially for professional workers, how hard it is. For lower wage workers, paycheck to paycheck, one sick kid away from, financial ruin, new baby, and by using worker stories to bring these issues to light, to really push the call for change has been incredibly an effective strategy for us. And then the last thing I would just say is litigation. I mean, sometimes, litigation is an effective public education strategy. I mean, we are out there trying to spread the word. We have big campaigns. We have partners out there day in and day out trying to let workers know about their new rights. But sometimes it takes bringing, a litigation to put put employers on notice that these are your obligations, and to change behavior. So that's another important strategy.
I wanted to bring Anne in here too, if I could. Anne, you obviously in your book, you wrote all about the value of care and how it was not valued, right, in our society and in our economy. Where do you think we are in terms of now, 10 years later, later than for your book, but in terms of the value of care, what are you encouraged about, and what are you deeply
Okay.
troubled about on
I had
that
a-
question?
I had a number or two. Well, I think there's two things that are, by the way, when I started talking about policy early 10 years ago, I thought the two things that would happen would be paid leave. It's so obvious, and we are such an outlier on the topic. And the other thing would be childcare, and more subsidized childcare, which is what is totally needed. And they both made glacial progress, but not as much as it might have happened. I think the recession set it back. I think there was a big increase in state mandating early education. States like Georgia, Oklahoma, Nebraska, places you don't think of as liberal states, have really put in place 4-year-old education, 5-year-old. And that has spread. And then secondly, in terms of money, there have been way more expenditures on early education in the last 10 years. However, 20% of children age 4 go to primary school, preschool. So it's still a drop in the bucket. So it's progress, but it's still incredibly, incredibly slow. I think that's the way to summarize everything. My image that comes to mind is we've been swimming, we've kept our head above water, but we've got a really powerful current
Yeah.
pushing against us. And I would add that one reason I think the recession was number one. The states started to pull back on the speed of spending more. It's pretty generally agreed, that's progress, that preschool is important, which is critical to women working. Low-income women desperately need it. But we don't want to spend the money, and the kids don't get the money. I think the amount of spending on children, which includes child care and Medicare for kids, Medicaid, I should say, has increased 2% in the last few years. Increased military spending,
Right.
when we already spend more than the rest of the world put together, 700%. I mean, it's just so incredibly out of balance.
Yeah, I don't have the stat, maybe one of you have it at the ready, where there's
Yeah.
some stat that for every dollar we put into early childhood education and
Yeah.
pre-K, the benefits, I mean, in terms of their success
Yeah.
and their ability for jobs and education and declining needs from city, local, state,
We've known
Federal-
that since the 80s.
I know.
And
Head
the
Start.
data just keeps pouring in, pouring in, pouring in.
So what-
So it's
I
again
wanted
the
to
same
begin.
story. Awareness has increased dramatically. The reality on the ground is very slow. And,
I wanted to talk about one more strategy as we talk about
Yeah.
movement building. I think we've really learned in the last 10 years to work across issues and across communities in order to win. It's hard to go in a very marginalized community and talk about paid sick days if people fear deportation, right? Or if you want to talk about pay equity, but I'm having some huge community safety issues, right? But when we come together across issues and across communities as women and mothers, we can win on all these fronts in a way that we can't when the issues are siloed. And when we work across communities, it becomes easier to understand how things like paid sick days and paid family leave impact community safety, right? And impact the safety of kids. If you can stay home with them if they need to stay home and they don't have to stay home locked in the house by themselves and at the whim of things that happen in communities. And so when we start to make those connections to the issues and then also connect to people who may live in different communities, we've been able to really mobilize these wins in a way that I think is really unprecedented, So I think that the intersectionality is another strategy that is really important.
Just a word on that. You made a really great remark, I think, about this isn't just women's rights. It's not just, these issues all come together. And I was thinking, the whole discussion now is inequality. It's now inequality is hot. Let's talk about it. Let's do something. This issue could use more integration with that whole inequality debate. because who is the most unequal person in the world? It's a poor working mother. So that, we need to say more about how this would really impact
Yeah.
economic
Do
inequality.
you want to add to that at all?
Yeah.
I know you could say so much. I mean, because it is interesting, because income inequality, obviously in our presidential campaign, it is the issue, and economic justice is a key issue. And I'm sort of wondering what you all think about what made it the issue. We had the recession, and we have the plight of working families. But again, I go back to, it doesn't have to be this way, right? So there are things happening, work you all are doing, awareness, education, real person experiences, social media. I'm just wondering what you think are those key factors that are getting people to see it in a different lens than they did before.
I think once again, we're going to need some really creative thinking about how we bring together the inequality debate and all of the work on work-family issues. Certainly, bringing those concepts together and looking at all of the research that exists to flesh out that concept is something that I've done a great deal in the past year or so at the Center for American Progress. And these are, it absolutely is the essential truth of what we're talking about. The inequality of access is terrible, and the problematic part of having companies, let's say, in Silicon Valley taking the lead so aggressively now in competing for talent by offering these more and more generous leave packages, is that it sort of ends up hiding what's happening to the vast majority of people who are not the workers who
Right,
are being competed
right.
for in that way. The problem is that some of the inequality language doesn't work well for large numbers of people who need to be convinced to supporting these policies. So again, there has to be some kind of creative way of engaging the theme in a way that meets people where they are and engages their imaginations, their hopes, their feelings about family, rather than pushing them out.
The other thing I would add to that is that the discussion of intersectionality in this work is really powerful. And when we've seen it growing over the last decade and a half, and where we really see it is the emergence of this inequality frame with work and families. We've seen it inside of campaigns where in the state of Massachusetts, they passed paid sick days, but they collected signatures for the paid sick days campaign with minimum wage signatures. And they actually had a ballot initiative and were prepared to go to the ballot in the state of Massachusetts on either or, depending upon what the state legislature wanted to do. And they put it in the state legislature's hands and said, look, we have the signatures for either a ballot initiative for either minimum wage or paid sick days. And it was one of the first, it was a critical moment in these campaigns, because it was the first time that we had combined two economic justice policies and said that while we can't have the same, of course, the same ballot language, every lawyer in the room knows that. What you can do, though, you can do the education at the doors at the same time. You can link them together. You can say that if a person has a very good job and they have a really great wage, but they get fired because their child is sick, what good is that? And really trying to make the connection strong between paid sick days and minimum wage. And so we've seen that in CTAC with the $15 minimum wage in the state of Washington, and at the same time doing paid sick days, passing paid sick days. We've seen some of those sort of marriages happen, and it's, I think, a really powerful statement to make, and it means that you're not fighting for crumbs, like two different coalitions,
Right.
You're actually joining forces together. The other thing, just to change the subject for a second, I would be remiss if I didn't say a major thing that also changed in terms of building momentum for this work over the last 10 years has been the funding that's coming into our organizations to support it. It's certainly true that foundations have grown up sort of with our coalitions to join forces together and fund this work. And that's been really exciting to see. Some have taken tremendous leadership. Some of the members of the foundation world have taken real leadership in funding work and family policy efforts.
Yeah.
Can I name names?
So we can all go
So I know
call
that-
them after.
So, well, so some maybe are in this room.
Right.
But what I would say is that large foundations have really seen that this is a critical issue, not just for women, not just for families, but for the entire economy, and have helped us make that frame using their foundation dollars. So that's been really, really exciting.
I wanted to add one more piece too, because both of you mentioned the Obama administration, and when I was talking about how women's political power has grown really over the last 4 decades, we also now have more women elected officials in the state houses, in city councils, and in the Senate. And we've seen, like with the U.S. Senate, that the women are more likely to work together. They're more likely to work bipartisan than the men. So there's a shift, and I think that even the Obama administration, by, of course, giving them the accolades they deserve, a lot of stuff has to move through the states first, right? We always need these case studies to say, it worked well in this state, it worked well in San Francisco, the jobs didn't go down. A lot of the people on the ground, I know here in New York City, the Councilwoman Gail Brewer, everywhere you go, so the Obama administration is really standing on the shoulders of these women legislators. And we're able to have these more women in these legislatures because women are growing their political power. So again, it still goes back to the grassroots that he can even do what he's doing. Is this mood lighting?
I don't know.
I don't know, or is that are we cut off?
We're out of town.
We're getting close, probably.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just going to add to Monifa, absolutely, more women, the better. But I think what's been surprising to us along the way has been, light. We've had some really strong male leaders, political leaders who have actually recognized these issues, and I think this will be discussed further. But, first of all, look at Governor Cuomo. I mean, really, he is leading, he had a vision of packaging a broad range of women's equality measures together, from the workplace to society at large. He clearly, it was an issue that, was cared deeply about as a father, and now as a son, really taking on paid family leave. His leadership has really been extraordinary, and I think that in the city, too. I mean, look at how paid sick time, De Blasio ran with it, in his election, and it was really, how important that issue really was, actually. It was really striking, and even willing to put millions into the city budget for enforcement. And then unusual allies. I mean, Mayor Bloomberg is the one who signed the New York City Pregnant Workers Fairness Act into effect. I mean, he was very common sense, and he said, this should be the law. And, a few weeks later, a little longer than that, but guess what? Governor Christie signed the law in New Jersey. Now, we're not going to get this on every issue, clearly, but, I just have to say some of these issues, sometimes we have some unusual allies. We're able to build bridges, and see common ground, and that's incredibly inspiring.
I wonder, because I know we got to make room for the next panel. I was just going to ask, I don't know, do we take questions, or we can? Okay, so someone's raising her hand. Go ahead, yeah.
If you have to leave, you sure can. I'm part of the campaign to bring CDOT to New York City. And with this started in San Francisco, CDOT is the UN law, which it stands for the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And under a CDOT law, the city or state or whatever the locality is responsible for making equality in employment, in housing, and education, in all different forms of life. And it does include paid leave and parental leave, and it can go much further in terms of classes for parents and all other kinds of things for parents if people want to bring that to it. But first, we have to enact the law in New York City. And it started in San Francisco.
Yeah, that's right.
Done this, and you can see all the progress that San Francisco has made.
Absolutely, and how that builds on, all of that progress builds on the other progress, and also, Dina, you were talking about unusual things that happen, and I'm wondering maybe the way we can close this panel, because there's another amazing panel to come about what we need to do in the next 10 years, right? But closing off, maybe we can talk a little bit about that unusual aspect or surprises. Anything that surprised you over the past decade that you just thought, I would never quite have expected that to happen? I don't want to put you guys on the spot, so don't feel under the gun if you don't have a thought. But any surprises over the past 10 years? Anyone want to start?
I think Dina should.
Well, I think I was, referring to some of them when I said, when Governor Christie's
Right.
office said, we will absolutely get behind that state pregnant worker fairness act law. I think that's a good idea.
Did you drop the phone?
Oh, really?
But great, right?
But
We're
great,
gonna take
but
that support
great.
wherever we
I
get
would,
it.
great. I would say, sometimes, you bang your head against the wall as advocates, fighting for the policies, fighting, and then when Governor Cuomo announced the Women's Equality Act, that was it was actually a surprise, and that was very, very exciting, and now paid family leave. So those are two, I think of two surprises.
Yeah, Munif, I know you have to go. Any
Yeah, I'm
last
going to say I'm
words?
going to
Good.
do some work-family balance. I have to go get my children from school.
Yes, so, yes,
So
we all
I'm gonna-
understand that.
I'm going to bow out, but yeah, I think that even the even the election, I think was a huge surprise to many people in 2008, and it's just I just think it's been, I don't know if it's so much a surprise. We know these things can advance. I think my biggest wow moment was when paid sick days here in New York City was approved by the city council, and then it was vetoed by Bloomberg. And under the Bloomberg administration, a veto had never been overridden. And the discussion around paid sick days when it came to this override vote went well into the night. I mean, just a really dramatic moment where people told their stories, and you could really see that this issue had moved from margin to center. So, and to override, the mayor, sitting mayor in office, for the city council to do that was just really powerful. And it was a surprise in many ways, but it was also a signal that this is really the time to push all of these policies forward in a way, striking the iron while it's hot. That was something that really moved me, the passing of paid sick days here in New York City.
That's a great-
And better balance and all the organizations that played a role in that.
That's great. Now go get your kids.
Thank you.
Carol, any thoughts on?
Yeah, I think, so I do realize that Governor Cuomo had tremendous foresight and was thinking very sort of out of the box when he, conceived of this women's economic agenda. And I was really pleased to hear of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and all of the work that's been done in New York State. I was surprised, though, at his State of the State address this year, when he said that he thought we should pass paid family leave, in the state of New York. And I was surprised because just 1 year ago, he said that, I don't want to bring up, bad news, but he did say that the state doesn't have an appetite for paid family leave. And people responded really strongly to that because we were starving in New York State. I live in D.C., but I'm from New York. And so we have been starving for paid family leave. So we responded. And so just 1 year later, in his State of the State address, and I know on the heels of his father's passing, that probably gave him a lot to think about. 1 year later, I was surprised to hear him say that he was now on board with paid family leave. And it was everything has changed since he has said that, so it's a great thing.
That's great. No. Judith?
I would say that the thing that has surprised me the most in the past 10 years or so seems unrelated but isn't, and it's the success of the marriage equality movement. Because that's an area where we have seen a really, really profound change in mentalities in the U.S., and it happened relatively fast. So again, I think that moving forward, there are undoubtedly a lot of lessons to be culled from there.
That's great. Yeah. Anne, final word from you?
No, I'm fine.
No, no surprises. Any quick question in the audience? Nope, not putting you all on the spot? All right, let's give a round of applause for these fabulous.